Level 1, the Errand Boy. You're 17 and you live in a city where the buildings lean on each other like exhausted men. The neighborhood has a smell: diesel, fried food, something chemical underneath that nobody mentions. You know 3 people on your block with real jobs. Everyone else is working an angle. A man named Teo hands you $50 to carry a backpack from one end of the market to the other and leave it under a specific bench. You don't look inside. You've been taught not to look inside. You walk with your hands in your pockets and your eyes forward, feeling everyone watching you even though nobody is. You leave the bag. You walk away. Nothing happens. You buy food with the money and feel like you've gotten away with something enormous. You do it again the next week. Twice a week after that. Then every other day, and Teo gives you a phone, a cheap burner that buzzes with instructions in short-coded messages. You respond with single numbers. You never ask questions. Questions are for people who want to stay broke. By 18, you know approximately nothing about the operation you're part of. You're a hand. You carry things, deliver things, and you know exactly 3 names above you. That's by design. You're a fuse, not a wire. You burn, the circuit continues. You don't fully understand this yet. You think you matter. You don't. Level 2, the street coordinator. You're 21. Teo got arrested and disappeared into the court system, and the man above Teo decided you were reliable. Reliable means you kept your mouth shut when 2 detectives sat across from you in a gray room and asked about the backpacks. You told them nothing because you knew nothing. They let you go. The man above Teo noted this. Now you're the name people call when something needs to move through the southern blocks. You manage 4 runners, all younger than you, and they look at you the way you used to look at Teo. You tell them what they need to know and nothing more. You pay in cash and you never meet them all in the same place at the same time. You learned that from the man above you, whose real name you still don't know. You call him Salvo. He calls you by a number. You understand the structure now, the way it's designed to be opaque from the inside. Nobody knows more than their immediate layer. Information travels up and never down. Money moves sideways through people who don't speak to each other. The product, you've seen it now, pressed white bricks in industrial plastic, moves along routes that change every week. Not for elegance. Because someone almost got caught on Tuesday, and by Thursday the entire delivery geography has shifted 3 kilometers east. Your days are made of small tensions. A runner doesn't show. A phone stops answering. A car that should be at a corner isn't. Most of the time things resolve. Sometimes they don't. You start sleeping lighter. You start sitting with your back to walls. Level 3, the city distributor. 25 and you're running product across an entire metropolitan district. Not physically, you haven't touched product in 2 years. You manage people who manage people. 3 mid-level distributors report to you, each with their own networks of handlers and runners. You're responsible for volume, timing, and keeping the chain intact. The money is different now. Not cash in a gym bag. It comes through a cleaning operation, a car wash, a printing shop, a food import stall in the wholesale market, owned by people connected to the organization. Your cut arrives as invoiced payments for services never rendered. On paper, you consult for logistics companies. You've never set foot in a warehouse. The problems are different too. At street level, problems are physical: a bag gets seized, a runner gets robbed. At your level, they're organizational. 2 distributors are fighting over territory. One is skimming. You know he's skimming because the numbers haven't matched for 6 weeks. You report upward. 3 days later he stops answering his phone. A week after that, quiet word reaches you that he relocated to another city. You accept this. You file the lesson somewhere you don't examine too closely. You buy your mother a better apartment. She asks how you're doing so well. You tell her the import business is expanding. She seems satisfied. You're not sure whether she believes you or has decided to stop asking. Either way, the conversation closes and doesn't reopen. Level 4, the regional logistics manager. 29, overseeing operations across 4 cities. You don't live in any of them permanently. You rotate through furnished apartments the organization maintains for this purpose. Each one has a clean identity attached: utility bills, a registered name, a lease signed by someone who won't be found. You stay a few weeks, handle what needs handling, move on. You've stopped thinking of yourself by your given name. Names are friction. The fewer people who know your real name, the smaller your exposure. You've read about operational security in places you shouldn't have had access to, declassified intelligence reports, a counter-narcotics training manual that circulated in the wrong hands. You applied what you learned.
It keeps you functional.
Your job is coordination across geography. Product moves along routes that cross international borders. Those borders matter enormously and not at all at the same time. They matter because crossing them creates risk. They don't matter because the organization has already mapped every meaningful crossing point, every corrupt customs agent, every blind spot in every scanner. You're not responsible for border operations. You're responsible for what happens after. Product arrives at a staging location and you get it to the city-level distributors cleanly and on schedule. One evening a shipment is 3 days late.
You make the calls.
Information comes back in fragments. There was a problem at the crossing. A new customs supervisor, unvetted, created complications. The problem has been resolved, the message says, without elaborating further. The shipment arrives the next morning and you distribute it and log the event as a delay in your internal records. You understand, for the first time with real clarity, that resolved can mean any number of things. You decide this is not information you need. You become very good at not needing information. Level 5, the Border Operations Chief.
33.
You manage how product crosses international lines. Multiple routes, multiple methods, multiple layers of concealment. Some product moves in commercial freight, buried inside legitimate industrial shipments, surrounded by paperwork that describes it as agricultural machinery components. Some moves in private vehicles with modified fuel tanks and compartmentalized door panels. Some moves through people, couriers who've agreed to carry for a fee that makes the risk seem rational until it doesn't. You manage the relationships that make this possible. A senior official at a port authority who receives a monthly payment to ensure 3 specific container numbers bypass secondary inspection. A freight company owner who doesn't ask questions about certain shipments in exchange for a contract arrangement that pads his annual revenue by 40%. A border guard who passes along scheduling changes and staffing rotations in exchange for an envelope that appears in his car twice a month. These are not friendships. They're agreements maintained through consistent payment and mutual exposure. The official takes your money, which means the official is compromised, which means his cooperation is enforced by his own risk as much as by the payments. The relationships that last aren't built on trust. They're built on the math of what happens to both parties if they stop. You lose a courier this year. A young woman, 22, carrying product through an airport in a third country. The scanner caught an anomaly.
She was detained.
She sits in a foreign facility, now waiting for a trial in a language she doesn't speak. The organization arranged a defense attorney to work on minimizing her sentence. This is described internally as taking care of their people.
The product was lost.
Her compensation, a family payment promised in the event of capture, arrives at her mother's address in funds that look like a life insurance disbursement. You signed the authorization. You don't attend the disbursement. You never meet the mother. Level 6, the International Route Architect.
38. You work across continents now.
Your function is infrastructure design, identifying, mapping, and establishing the movement corridors the entire organization depends on. You look at a map and figure out why a route works, when it will stop working, and what replaces it when it does. You have counterparts in 3 countries on 2 continents, and you've met almost none of them in person. Communication happens through encrypted channels and through intermediaries who carry verbal messages in ordinary places: a park, a market, a ferry terminal. You have a system for identifying these intermediaries that requires memorizing recognition sequences. You've memorized 47. You spend real time in the countries you work with. Not as yourself, under documentation that a specialized unit of the organization maintains, papers processed through the same forgery networks that handle credentials for people who need to disappear into a new name. You travel as an import consultant, a regional procurement officer, a logistics analyst for companies that exist only in their paperwork. You study the countries you work in. Customs infrastructure, port layout, the institutional culture of the agencies you're navigating around. You learn enough of each language to read official documents and follow conversations without translating. You never stand out. Standing out is a failure of preparation. You're in a hotel in a port city when word comes that a route you designed 6 months ago was compromised. A 16-ton shipment was seized at the destination port. 14 people connected to the receiving end are in custody. The route is dead. You spend 3 weeks designing its replacement. The failure point was scheduling predictability, the same 3 container numbers moving through the same 2 ports on the same rotating schedule until a pattern analyst at a customs agency noticed. You build the replacement with deliberate irregularity encoded into the scheduling logic. You test it twice with clean shipments.
Both clear.
You push the new architecture through the intermediary network and move to the next city. Level 7, the financial infrastructure director.
43.
The product side has become secondary. What you manage now is the money, moving it, cleaning it, placing it in structures where it becomes indistinguishable from lawful profit. Hundreds of millions of dollars annually require transformation before they can be touched by the people who earned them. The mechanisms are layered. Cash from street distribution moves through small service businesses, repair shops, import retail, small-scale hospitality, that absorb cash without obvious anomalies. From there it moves into holding companies registered in jurisdictions with minimal reporting requirements. From the holding companies it flows into development projects, investment funds, and private acquisitions that look like ordinary capital movement. By the time money reaches the principals, it has passed through 6 to 9 transformation stages and exists as documented profit from activities that happened. For accountants on permanent retainer, each knowing the perimeter of their involvement and nothing beyond it. 2 private bankers who understand their clients have irregular cash generation patterns and have made the calculation that the fees outweigh the risk. You manage these relationships the same way you manage every other relationship in this world: mutual exposure, enforced by consistent financial incentive. Law enforcement in multiple jurisdictions is searching for patterns in the financial architecture you manage. You know this because the organization keeps sources inside several of those agencies, not planted agents, but people in administrative positions who pass along general intelligence about investigative priorities. When you learn that a specific jurisdiction is running a real estate acquisition analysis, you pause that cleaning channel for 8 months and route equivalent volume through different instruments. When the analysis period ends, you restart the channel with modified parameters. You're sitting across from your daughter at a restaurant. She's 16, studying at a private school in another country, where she lives with her mother, your former wife, who left 11 years ago when she finally understood what you did with your days. Your daughter knows something is wrong with the shape of your life, but not the substance of it. She asks what you do again, exactly. You tell her you manage international investment portfolios. She says that sounds extremely tedious.
You agree with her. She almost smiles.
You order and talk about her studies, and you don't look at your phone for 90 minutes. It's one of the better evenings you can remember. Level 8, the Senior Operations Commander.
47.
You don't manage any single functional area anymore. You sit one level below the principals and coordinate between the operational divisions. Routes, distribution, financial infrastructure, enforcement, counterintelligence, all running in silos below you, and you're the layer that makes them function together without creating exposure through their connections. Enforcement occupies most of your attention. Every large-scale criminal enterprise needs a mechanism for internal discipline and external threat response, and managing that mechanism requires constant oversight to keep it from becoming a liability. Assets that operate with too much autonomy generate unpredictable events. A body turns up where it shouldn't. A journalist who was supposed to receive a warning receives something permanent instead. The organization is suddenly managing an investigation that wouldn't exist if someone had followed the protocol. You spend a significant part of your working weeks correcting the consequences of enforcement decisions that exceeded their authorization. You also manage counterintelligence. A dedicated unit exists to identify law enforcement infiltration, monitor known investigative targets, and run internal security assessments of personnel. Every 6 months a report lands on your desk identifying someone in the mid-level structure who has been cooperating with authorities. The resolution of these identifications is handled by enforcement, through protocols designed to produce outcomes that don't generate the kind of attention that makes problems worse. Over the years you've come to see that the organization has the internal structure of a government: divisions with specialized functions, interdivisional communication protocols, resource allocation processes, a dispute resolution mechanism, and a succession framework for when senior personnel are lost to arrest or other termination of service. The people at the top think of it this way. The people at the bottom have no concept of it. That gap in comprehension is itself a security feature.
You don't sleep well.
Not from guilt, from operational awareness. There are too many things that could go wrong at any given time, and you're the person responsible for most of them not going wrong. Your doctor prescribes something for the sleep.
You take it. It helps a little.
You're up at 5 a.m. regardless, sitting in a chair going through overnight reports from the 3 time zones where active operations are running. By 6:30 you've sent 12 responses, 2 course corrections, and 1 quiet message to the counterintelligence unit about a distribution manager in the eastern sector whose behavioral patterns have shifted in ways that warrant a closer look.
Level 9, the principal. 52.
For people own the organization jointly. You are one of them. The other 3 navigated similar paths from similar origins and arrived here through different routes and the same combination of capability, ruthlessness, and duration.
You respect them. You don't trust them.
They don't trust you. That's the foundation the arrangement works on. You don't manage operations anymore. You own them. Quarterly, you receive financial summaries that have been processed through 7 layers of aggregation before they reach you, and those summaries tell you approximately how well the enterprise is performing against the projections you set at the start of the fiscal cycle. The enterprise clears somewhere north of $800 million in annual profit after all operational and infrastructure costs. Your share moves through the financial architecture you once designed and now receive the product of, arriving in investment accounts and asset portfolios in your name and in holding structures that represent your interests. You have a private security team of 8, former special operations personnel from 3 countries, hired through a legitimate private security consultancy. Professional, thorough, aware in general terms of what kind of principle they're protecting. They don't ask questions beyond their brief. You're a legitimate figure in certain circles.
An investor.
A philanthropist whose foundation funds educational infrastructure in several developing countries. The foundation is real. The schools are real. The children receiving educations are real. You built it because you wanted something that functioned without deception at its core, not as cover, but as the one part of your life that required none. You sit on the board with architects and development economists and former government ministers. When they describe program outcomes, you listen carefully. You can speak about those outcomes without calculating anything first. But 2 of the principals receive word this year that a multi-jurisdictional task force, coordinated across 4 countries with American federal support, has been running a structured investigation of the organization for 31 months. The counterintelligence assessment is that it has penetrated the mid-level distribution structure in 2 regions and assembled financial intelligence sufficient to support prosecutions up to the senior operations layer. The task force's awareness of the principal level is assessed as incomplete but growing. The 4 principals meet in a location accessed by different routes on different days. The conversation runs about 90 minutes. You speak the most, because you were the senior operations commander before you became a principal and you understand the investigation's framework better than the others. You lay out 3 scenarios. The room is quiet while you speak. Outside the window, the sun moves across a garden that is genuinely beautiful. You notice this. The garden continues to be beautiful while you describe scenarios involving significant institutional risk to people whose names you know and significant recalibration that will take years to execute. You don't allow these 2 things to occupy the same register of your attention at the same time. You've been practicing that particular compartmentalization for decades.
Level 10, the end of the line.
You're 59 when they come for you. 7 years as a principal. The task force your counterintelligence unit identified kept growing for 2 more years before the indictments came, 81 people across 4 countries, named in documents released simultaneously across 3 jurisdictions. 47 arrested in the first 72 hours.
You weren't among them.
You'd been notified 16 minutes before the coordinated arrests began, through a channel you'd maintained as a personal redundancy for 11 years. You left through a route prepared for exactly this contingency. 19 months in a country with no extradition treaty. A city you'd visited twice before, in a furnished apartment that was clean and functional and deeply ordinary. Documentation, assets, 3 trusted contacts within reach. You were not comfortable. Comfortable is not what that period was. You waited in a state of suspended operational existence, and the waiting was its own kind of erosion. The arrest happened on a Tuesday morning. Not because of the investigation. Because one of the 3 trusted contacts had been cooperating with the American Federal Authority for 8 months before you arrived in the city. In retrospect, the behavioral signals were there. You missed them because you were managing too many things from too far away through too few channels, and because you've been doing this long enough to confuse experience with immunity. The trial takes 3 years. The evidence is extensive and meticulous. Prosecutors from multiple jurisdictions presented their cases in sequence, and the documentation, financial records, communications intercepts, testimony from 14 cooperating witnesses drawn from every level of the organization you'd built, assembled a picture of 35 years of operation with a precision that you found, in your more private moments, almost admirable. They'd done the work. You're 62 when the sentence is read. The judge speaks for 11 minutes before reaching the number. You look at your daughter in the gallery. She drove 3 hours to be there. Her expression is controlled in a way you recognize as the same mechanism you've used your entire adult life, the deliberate management of visible response when the interior is something the exterior cannot fully contain. She learned it from watching you. This is not something you feel neutral about. You serve in a federal facility. The conditions are institutional but not savage. You have access to a library and you read extensively the economic histories of extractive industries, structural analyses of illicit trade networks across the past 3 centuries. The shape of what you spent your life doing is visible in the historical record, mapped by people who studied it from the outside with the benefit of hindsight and distance. Different products, different geographies, the internal architecture consistently similar. The pattern repeated because the conditions that produce the pattern are durable.
You write to your daughter. She responds.
Infrequently at first, then more regularly. Her daughter, your granddaughter, who you met twice before the arrest, is 7 years old now and draws pictures that your daughter sometimes tucks into the envelopes. Animals, houses, the sun in the corner of the page, which is where children put the sun. You pin one to the wall above your bunk. You look at it in the mornings. A junior official at the facility asks, during a routine administrative meeting, whether you have any professional skills that could be used in the vocational programs. You tell him you have extensive experience in logistics coordination and network management. He writes this down without apparent irony. You're assigned to help with inventory management for the facility's supply chain. The supply chain is inefficient in ways that are obvious to you within the first week. You fix 3 things. The supply officer thanks you. 40 years of this and the most straightforward work you've ever done turns out to be a prison storeroom. Somewhere in a neighborhood that smells like diesel and fried food and something chemical underneath, a 17-year-old is carrying a backpack across a market and leaving it under a bench and walking away with $50 and the feeling that he's gotten away with something enormous. He has gotten away with something.
For now.
The gap between now and the end of the line is 35 years of movement and calculation and accumulated cost, and it closes at a rate that's invisible until it isn't. The man who handed him the backpack knows this. The man above that man knows this. The 4 people who own the network that extends from that bench in that market to port authorities in 6 countries and private accounts in 4 more. They know this with a particular precision that comes from having watched the same sequence run from beginning to end enough times to understand exactly how the probability distributes. The errand boy doesn't know. He won't know for a long time. And the not knowing is what makes him useful. It's also what makes him, eventually, the person standing in a courtroom while a judge reads a number from a document. The structure depends on his not knowing.
It always has.
It's the oldest design principle in the entire architecture. He walks home with his $50. The evening comes down over the neighborhood.
The buildings lean.
The smell of the city sits on everything. The cycle continues.